There's a really neat thing people do. It's very much related to whatabouts. I'm going to bring up something. Thought-terminating cliches are, let's try something more fun. Stupidity-terminating Google searches. Plant fascination. Fasciation. Fasciation. I can't pronounce it. You type it in and hit image search, you see a bunch of plants that have doubled heads and all sorts of bizarre abnormalities. Because this abnormality doesn't actually affect whether or not the posy you're looking at can make seeds, be pollinated with bees, or do anything else for that matter, it isn't selected out by pressures to be impossible, for the same reason that a person can be born with an abnormally shaped pupil or a blotch on their iris that makes the eye look a little funny. There's nothing wrong with it, it doesn't affect anything, it doesn't cause a medical problem, and it is not an indication of Fukushima radiation. Because it freaking isn't. Plant fasciation, I can't pronounce it correctly, I'm sorry. Fasciationist. That is a natural consequence of plants having DNA chains that are, different than, not really different than anything else. People are sometimes born with an extra toe. It's not a sign of radiation, it's just reality's weird, it's not really consistent. And this is something that's been observed for millennia. Sort of like finding four-leaf clovers. It's an abnormality. Having blue eyes is also a mutation. It doesn't mean all the blue-eyed people in history are, post-apocalyptic zombies. It also doesn't mean that they're pure Aryan race or anything like that. I can do something unusual with my eyebrows. Or my ears. These are throwback characteristics. That doesn't mean that I'm less human, it just means I retain neurological capabilities and spent a lot of time because I was bored staring in a mirror making my muscles work and my scalp and face. It's not a talent, I have no life. But anyway, here we go. If water itself is radioactive, because it has tritium, a variation of hydrogen where it has way too many neutrons, and then you evaporate that water into radioactive water vapor, hurt people. But most of the contamination is actually dissolved heavier elements, so when you have rainwater come off the ocean by evaporation, which we've known about for a long time, and this is not a real process that you can fudge, it doesn't release plutonium up into the air. The isotopes of hydrogen and oxygen, specifically hydrogen in this case, tritium, would go up in the air. But it also boils off at a different temperature, so it might form different cloud layers. And tritium-based water from a power plant being fed seawater isn't going to create a high enough dose in the ocean to combat all of the thinning out. And in fact, putting it in the air would actually thin it out more over the ocean. It'll rain over the ocean, Water gets purified by being turned into rain clouds. Normally, water is purified in a chemical volume and control system in a nuclear power plant, and that's what they've been doing with it from Fukushima. But yeah, some of it did obviously must have gotten into the ocean. But the other elements aren't going to be distilled into the air. I'm responding to a specific person here. Someone who says that low doses of radioactive material. Stop using, I know it's the correct term, but it's hard to pronounce. Stop it. It's hard for me to do this. Will not cause necessarily just cancer. No, he says that it causes heart disease and autoimmune deficiencies. Now, I found found in exposure to radiation, you can have an immune system deficiency happen. It's usually in response to, it's secondary, it's third layer deep, but it's not from being exposed to radionuclides dropped in apparently tainted rainwater from evaporating uranium into a water vapor. Because that's not actually what happens. When water vapor from a rain cloud that's been hit with radioactive dust comes across, that's different. That's not happening. The claim the person's making is that water purified by evaporation over the ocean is carrying radioactive materials, and these low doses must happen because they need an excuse to scare people in the United States, and that it causes heart disease and autoimmune deficiencies. Now, this is the thing. If you're exposed to radiation, actual being hit by neutrons and such, not exposed to radioactive material, it's like getting blasted with radiation when you're going in for radiation therapy. It will cause an immune system response. The immune system becomes suppressed. Okay, but that's not the same mechanism. And this is 4 or 5 layers separated here. Next, as for heart disease, not even a citation, but thanks. Now let's talk about what this is really about. Oh yeah? You can contradict everything I'm saying? Including my pictures of fish that are mutated? Which are actually pictures from years before. I'm going to have to do that slideshow again, aren't I? Where I show every single picture the Fukushima fearmongers use that was from before Fukushima and not related to nuclear power, like tar sands and chemical spills and a bacterial infection downrange of a hospital that had infectious material get into the sewers and get into the Thames, and for some reason someone found a fish in the Thames or something like that. But somehow that's Fukushima, because someone needed a meme and some propaganda and F everybody else. But let's talk about the take that, checkmate. Oh yeah? You think you're an expert in physics and a Geiger counter salesman? Maybe he's a Geiger counter pimp. This is obviously about Forbid TV being diss-tracked by somebody who can't rap again. But anyway, would you mind telling me? And then he brings up something. Nobody can figure this out. Okay, well then if literally nobody in the world of physics can figure out what you're asking about, you don't have the answer, then why do you think someone else not having the answer means jack? But actually this is something. What is the radionuclide equilibrium evaporation coefficient for something? Okay, now we're going to take this apart slowly. If you're at this point in the video, I'm dealing with somebody, I think his name's Paul Mobley. Whatever. I don't know. I'm not even sure that's the right name. Probably mispronouncing it like everything else. Plant fasciation. See, I pronounced it right once. Yeah, just look up images. Okay. Radionuclide. Radioactive material. I'm dismantling this. This is what you do. Oh yeah? Well, do you know what ipso facto blah 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 is? There's an episode of the TV show called MASH where one of the hoity-toities has decided to play lawyer, and he asks another lawyer something in Latin. Do you know what blah 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 means? And the guy says, no, I don't. Well, there you are. That doesn't mean anything in court. It just means you don't know something. There's nothing wrong with that. Admitting you don't know something isn't supposed to be disempowering in an argument. It's supposed to be an acknowledgement. I don't know what the frick you're talking about. But yes, the judge knew what he said in Latin and said, yeah, I want you to tell everybody. He says it's Latin for starve a cold and feed a fever. And the judge, what you do is, that's a facetious or fascious or feces argument. Shit. So anyway, here we go. Radionuclides, radioactive material. Equilibrium, a point at which things come to a status where they stop changing or they're in balance. Equilibrium. Evaporation. Now we're dealing with water. The evaporation, or sublimating, well, I'm going to use the wrong word, of water turning into vapor. Okay? Now, water evaporating actually goes through a transition state where it's water vapor. And it could turn into a gas. Compounds don't act like elements. Elements do something slightly different, but not much different if they're combined with something, even temporarily. And then coefficient. Now this word I'm not going to bring up the definition for. It's a ratio, or a number, or a value, or some comorbid thing where it has to be associated with something. Like, what's the temperature where water evaporates? Well, you can have steam at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, but it evaporates at lower temperatures because it's not normally boiling hot over the ocean. So there's this whole thing of what's the rate of evaporation, and what is the temperature at which it won't evaporate based on air pressure and a bunch of other variables. You have to know what the variables are. And what is the temperature at which, no matter what it is, it'll evaporate. If you change the air pressure or the pressure of the water, it won't boil at boiling temperature, and it won't. And yeah, you can do this. You can make ice form at certain pressure levels at 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Water does not behave in a way that matches what you think it does based on pressure or temperature or air pressure temperature differences, agitation. What about the water temperature versus the air temperature? Relative humidity. See, so asking for the coefficient for water evaporation, that's important, right? But it would be different in nature to an element, because water isn't an element, it's a compound. And it behaves very strangely, as you've just found out. At different pressures, you can have ice at 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can have water that won't boil at 212. You want to do the experiment, go to the top of a mountain. That's why you have to put salt in it or something. You have to make it more of a messy compound to get it to do it. You can make water turn suddenly to ice if you do certain things with it. You can look up how to do that, right? Water's magic. Elements like uranium and plutonium do these things, and they can all sublimate. They can go from a solid straight to a gas, not even going through the vapor phase, so they do not evaporate, depending on what they are, what they're combined with as compounds, or what isotope they are, or their energetic state, self-energizing state. Now we take apart our request. Oh yeah? You're a Geiger counter salesman? So what's the radionuclide, which one? Equilibrium, status at which everything is in balance. Evaporation coefficient, alright? Which radionuclide, what pressure level, what medium is it in? Is it in a medium? What gas is it in? If it is in a gas, is it solid form? Is it in particulate form? Is it a compound or pure element? Asking a question that begs hundreds of other questions is a waste of everybody's time. Paul Mobley. Please stop trying to sound smart. I'm not smart, and all I did was just take apart the words. As for the coefficient, I think you're talking about the wrong word here. And yes, there is an actual question on this subject, but it deals with the generalized subject matter. It's a vague question on purpose, because that's what the subject matter is. That has nothing to do with whether or not daisies can have 2 heads or 5. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.